We're talking about emotions still. Freeze has been mentioned as one of our primary emotions. Access when the brain is running on this emotional side. Freeze gets really complicated because you can freeze even when you're running on the rational side of your brain.
POM pepper spray has recently reformulated for even more effect when you bless the deserving with the hot sauce. POM is what I use between a harsh word and a gun and encourage everyone to do likewise.
Who is this? RCA Victor Dog, right? You know, the whole idea was like he's hearing his master's voice coming out for something different, so he's kind of turned sideways quizzically. That's probably not the face you want to have in the middle of a life and death crisis, right? So let's talk about orienting responses. When facing situations, the mind will pause and fixate to seek additional information. Orientation responses cause actual physiological changes in the body. For instance, the pupils will dilate in low light, the eyes will center on the unknown, and they will halt current behavior, including movement. The quote, the presence of a novel stimulus or threat will automatically trigger an orienting response from evaluating police tactics, which is an absolutely fascinating work, right? This was done by the alert guys. And what they wanted to understand was what was the best tactics for patrol guys, not SWAT guys that are going to get to train together once or twice a month. What are the best tactics for room entry for normal patrol guys? And here's a crazy idea. Let's conduct something resembling a scientific experiment to test this, right? So I'm not a CQP guy or anything like that, so just bear with me. They're looking at a corner-fed room. So like this is the door and this is the room. On a corner-fed door, I can already clear this corner, right? So the question is Jerry over there ready to kill me or not, right? And the answer is always yes, right, Jerry? Right, okay. So the issue was like they would tell their officer to respond differently. On some it would be, go in, drive to that corner no matter what, right? Drive to that corner no matter what. What they found was even though they were doing this with Sims, they would tell the officer, drive to that corner no matter what. When the officer started to come in and there was something unknown there, what would the officer do? Stop, try to gather information and identify it. So even though they had started the movement, they would tend to stop and engage in that orienting response to figure out what was going on. The author said the orienting response to a stimulus can be overcome by a process called habituation. Officers can be repeatedly exposed to a stimulus in order to habituate them to the stimulus and overcome the orienting response. It's almost like they have to train or something. I'd also point out that in my mind, some of the freezing stuff we see in real life is probably an issue of acceptance. There are people out there for whom the badge and the gun is just a job. I don't think anybody would ever try to kill them, right? I also think it explains why so many officers are feloniously murdered without ever drawing their duty gun. It is absolutely disturbing to me when you go back and you look at the LEOCA data, how many officers die with a perfectly serviceable gun in their holster. Now, are some of those straight up ambushes, right? You respond to a structure fire with the fire department. And as you're getting out of the patrol car, the crazy ass fireman has a rifle and shoots you as you're standing outside. Can we do much about that one? No, but that is not the majority of the situations. Because nobody believes me, I've just learned to put the document up on the screen so it's not just me telling you. This is LEOCA data for 2010 to 2019. We had a number of victims officers in this period was 511. And they talk about the number of officers who discharged their own firearm, attempted to use, but did not use their firearm. Number of victim officers who did not use and did not attempt to use their firearm. 301 of those. So on this, 58.9, which is really close to 60, okay, had a perfectly serviceable gun on their side and did not use it the day somebody killed them. But realistically, that 511 number, there's some, if you go down further down the table, they don't have data on that, right? So if we compare it to the actual one we know, it actually pushes it up to 63% of the officers that were feloniously killed in the line of duty during this period never drew their gun or attempted to do basically anything to save their life. And why is that? Because they're sitting there doing the RCA Victor Dog when they finally run across the guy that wants to kill them. One thing that drives me crazy is this police reform group called PERF. One of the PERF's big points is we got to stop showing people murders of videos, videos that show the murders of officers because it just puts them on a hair trigger. I got news for you. You have to expose people to the stuff they're likely to do. Everybody's conceptions of violence comes from TVs and movies. Real life violence is what? It's fast, right? And if you don't have a conception in your mind, if your mental map does not include that, you're never ever going to do well. Hypothetically, there's a unit in the United States Army called Delta. I think they change their name every couple of years and stuff like that, right? When they first formed that unit, the requirement was that somebody already in the unit had to avouch that you had stood and fought in combat. And in the 70s, when you had a large pool of guys who had been to Vietnam, they had a fairly big pool of people they could pull from. As that pool began to shrink, they had to find other ways to identify people that would be able to perform well in that unit. Okay? In what may seem bizarre at first, they found 3 activities, recreational activities that people engaged in that had very, very high crossover and predictability for doing well as far as Delta. They were skydiving, rock climbing, and motorcycle racing. Okay? Did I say car racing? No, it's motorcycle racing, because what's between you and the world when you're motorcycle racing? Well, a little leather, maybe. I mean, yeah. So, what do these things have in common, though? Well, number one, they kind of show you that somebody's risk meter is a little bit off, if this is what they do for fun, right? But they all require that you perform some fine motor skills under the penalty of grievous injury or death, right? In a nutshell, to succeed, the mind had to learn to trust the rational mind and let it stay in control.
Super high cost.
Yeah, super high cost. And this is what I emphasize enough. Even though they're doing this stuff that isn't directly related to killing God for the country, because they require the same skills, it has very direct transfer. These scientifically correlate well with being able to perform under high levels of stress, because that trust relationship is developed no matter where you do it. Now, I hesitate to call Jim Cirillo a layperson, but in the academic world he is, right? In Gun Bullets and Gunfighting, he talked about the 12 questions they used to select police officers for specialized units that were deliberately seeking, conflict with the bad guys. Overall, these questions are asking for 2 things, right? The ability to perform in the moment, as well as the ability to deal with the long-term stress. What they found with the New York Stakeout Squad was it was fairly easy to find officers who could get through the first shooting, kill the first bad guy. What they had a very hard time doing was finding people who would come back and do that again and again and again, right? And what they're screening for is they want to know, are you going to be able to do the first one? Ideally, are you going to be able to do 2 or 3 or 17? What's really interesting about Cirillo was not the highest body count guy that came out of that unit. His partner, Bill Allard, actually had more gunfights and bad guys on him than he did, right? Has anybody here ever read this book? This is thoroughly entertaining from the cop perspective, because they're literally shooting bad guys and attending autopsies to see how the bullets they just loaded worked. Hollow points didn't exist. They were a lot of these guys were headshots. And the really problem with shooting them with 45s is that rounded curve was really hard. So his partner loved to shoot guys with 45. He'd put some custom hand-loaded bullet in the chamber, and then everything else that followed it was hardball, so it was fed. So they'd literally shoot people and then run to the autopsy to see how that stuff worked out, right?